Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be my full review of this knife, and this is the Jack Wolf Knives Sharpshooter, and this is the second version, the version from 2024 here, January in 2024. And this is a knife that I was really excited to see coming back out, and that's because the Sharpshooter was the first model that Jack Wolf Knives brought out. And I had gotten to see some of the prototypes of different models that Ben, and real quick here, I want to thank Ben for sending this knife along for review. I love getting to check these out, and I really appreciate it. But I had gotten to check out some of the prototypes of different models that he had before these actually came, to the market, to full production, and really loved the designs, thought they looked great. But when I got to check this knife out, when it first came out almost 2 years ago, and I got to see just how well Ben translated the classic gunstock pattern into a modern rendition of a slip joint, that's what kind of hooked me on these Jack Wolf knives. And I've been super fortunate to get to check out all of the models, and it's really cool to see some of these models kind of coming full circle and getting some of the updates that Ben has been doing for the newer models. So I wanted to talk about some of that first. I did talk about some of this in the unboxing that I did of this knife, but I wanted to talk about it here also. So first of all, if you look at the original version of the Sharpshooter, the bolster is shorter. So the new version of the Sharpshooter here in 2024 is having this longer bolster, and it's another thing that Ben has done on one of the models that has been re-released, which is the laid back jack. So I'll show you the laid back jack being the second model that was released for Jack Wolf Knives, and you can see the same deal here, an elongated bolster. So it's something that Ben has done a couple times there, and I really do like it. Now, an elongated bolster can sometimes mean that the knife is a Barlow, and I love Barlows, but this is not a Barlow just because it has an elongated bolster. The bolster would need to be probably a little bit more of the knife. Usually people say around a third the total length of the knife being the bolster. But really, even if it was that long, being that this is a gunstock jack pattern, I don't think I've ever seen a gunstock Barlow. I don't think it's something that really quite makes sense. So it's not a Barlow, it's just an elongated bolster, and I do think it looks good. Now, you would be able to tell the difference a little bit better if this was one of the versions with covers, but it's not. As you can see, this is the Jig Titanium version, but you can imagine it's just a little bit longer there. Then another thing with the bolster is that it has the three lines that have become kind of, something that's on all of the models. Ben mentioned to me that it's something that he plans to put on any models he can. Now, interestingly, a knife that came out relatively recently here, the Little Bro Jack, did not have those three lines. And I think that was really because the Little Bro was kind of a re-release. It finally was released in a full release, to the public after really on the third try. So I think that was just because it had already been designed with the single line. But I do think other models will have those three lines. Another more recent model here, the After Hours Jack, also having those three lines. So I do really like that. I think it gives it a very kind of classy look. It's something that you see on a lot of higher end knives. So speaking of Barlows, here is my Sean Yaw custom Barlow. You can see it's got really four lines, two on the top, two on the bottom of this rat tail here. But a similar feel. It gives you that more kind of sophisticated feel to the bolster. It's something you see on Northfield knives from Gradation Cutlery, not so much on the Titty Ute knives. So I do appreciate that. And another difference is that it has a little bit of a stronger pull. Now, it's not massive. I would say that the Sharpshooter has maybe a little bit lighter pull than some of the other models that have come out since it, which is all of the models. But I would say the Sharpshooter is maybe right around a 5, maybe slightly above 5.5, something like that. I do love the action on this. You can hear it sounds great. But the models since the original Sharpshooter have had a little bit stronger pull, and this is more in line with that. So I'll show you the second version of the Vampire Jack. Same deal, definitely a stronger pull on this also, and this new version of the Sharpshooter is more in line with that. Speaking of the opening, another difference is that this has a long pull here. So you can see the original had a nail nick. This one has a long pull. I personally like them both. I think that the long pull does go really well with the gun stock pattern because of this kind of cutout here. That long pull fits right in with the cutout here that makes the gun stock shape. Honestly, the nail nick does too. I don't have a strong preference between the two, and they both work great. They're really well done. This has nice sharp corners so that it's easy to get a purchase on it with your thumbnail, and it definitely allows for the knife to be pinched open also, which I do prefer. I generally prefer a knife to be pinched open, generally prefer single blades, so that's why being that most of the Jack Wolf knives are pinchable and single blades, they kind of really hit the spot for me as slip joints. Now another difference with the blade is that, like a lot of the more recent models, the new version of the Sharpshooter has a larger sharpening choil. So something that Ben has said a lot of people have requested. I personally am not a huge sharpening choil person, but I think that it doesn't hurt. You know, if you're gonna have a sharpening choil like this, it doesn't hurt to have a larger one. You might get like ever so slightly less cutting edge, but it's not gonna make a real difference in use. It kind of gives it a striking look, to be honest. I do like the look of it, even if practically in cutting a sharpening choil can kind of get some snagging. But in my use of this knife and the other Jack Wolf knives that have had the larger sharpening choil, I haven't noticed any real issues. So it's kind of like a philosophical practical issue, or a theoretical, I guess, not philosophical. So that is another difference there. I think that at least on mine, there is a little bit of a difference in the swedge. Now, that said, these are, you know, somewhat hand ground, so that could be just on my model. You can see that the swedge is a little bit smaller on mine. The blade maybe has a little bit pointier of a point, but I have sharpened the original version of the Sharpshooter a few times. Another difference is the steel. They switched over, these Jack Wolf knives switched over to S90V a while back. I believe that it was maybe with the low drag. So the low drag is S90V, and whereas the Viper, is that what this one's called? I'm kind of forgetting, but it is not, it's M390. So they did switch over a while back, and I do really like the S90V. Before using these Jack Wolf knives, I was not super familiar with S90V, but in my use between the two, in particular between, you know, the two same models but with different steels, I do think I prefer the S90V. It seems really not to be that hard to sharpen. I use diamond stones to sharpen, you know, all my knives basically when reprofiling, and it holds an edge really well. So I think that it's really well done, this S90V. And those are really the main differences. Now, one other thing is that micarta no longer available on Jack Wolf knives, at least for the foreseeable future. They've got a bunch of different versions of this and some new things. So they have done this jig titanium before, as you saw on my second version of the laid back Jack. Now, one difference here is that the laid back Jack jig titanium had a hand satin finish. This has the machine satin finish. So that is a difference, but the jig titanium has been done before on the Jack Wolf knives, but they're doing a glow in the dark fat carbon dark matter. I always have trouble making sure that I get those names right. That looks really cool. I like glow-in-the-dark knives. They're very traditional. Glow-in-the-dark knives have been around for a long time. I don't really have any old vintage glow-in-the-dark knives, but they have been around for a long, long time. So it is traditional, and making it that fat carbon carbon fiber basically kind of goes along with the modern interpretation of timeless design, as is the catchphrase for Jack Wolf knives. They're also doing something that's really cool, which is a plain titanium handle, so not jigged but plain, with all coated blacked out blade and hardware. So the screws are coated black, the blade is coated black, and the handle is not. I actually think that one looks really cool. And the reason for that is it's almost like a modern version of a patina. So a patina on a knife in carbon steel can darken the blade. So just a random one that I know has patina on it. This one, you can see it's kind of darkened there, some color to it. I'll show you probably a better example. This isn't the Dixie stock knife, this is the possum skinner. You can see it gets darker there, and that patina actually helps to kind of prevent actual rust. So I kind of think of that version with the black blade as being a modern version of a patina. It helps protect against rust. Not that you really are going to have to worry about that with the S90V, but it is something cool. I do think it kind of goes with the theme. Now, as usual, I'm almost 12 minutes into this video and haven't really talked about how well this knife is made or how it cuts. And the reason for that is because if you have followed these Jack Wolf knives, you probably know that they are made super well and they cut really well. There's two of the things that I also really love about them is that they are pretty impeccably made. You can see that there are no gaps whatsoever. There's a good contact between the blade and the spring. Super flush here in all positions. Just a beautifully made knife, well centered. The blade sits nice and deep in the frame. There's no blade play when open. As I mentioned, a nice sound to the walk and talk. So it's just a super well-made knife. These are expensive knives. They're $300, but I think that it's kind of in a league of its own. I haven't had a modern slip joint from any other company that really gave the same feel as these Jack Wolf knives. I've had modern slip joints from other companies that I really like, not really kind of denigrating the other, manufacturers or other brands, but it's a different feel to these. And they cut super well also. They are ground really nice and thin for cutting, which is what you want on a slip joint. You're not going to be batoning with this, although I just have this next to me here. In his recent video on the Stump Lifter, Advanced Knife Bro actually batoned with it at the end. So that was, I enjoyed that. But you're really not going to be doing that. You're going to be doing pretty light cutting. And really for me, what I use this mostly for, cutting up food for my son, opening some packages, some mail, things like that. And it's going to work really well for that because it is ground nice and thin. So, I love that these are ground thinly. I think that it's the right choice on a slip joint, and they do a great job of it. Now, one thing that, in carrying this particular knife that I found is that it feels thin to me. And I mean the handle. So the handle feels thin to me. The interesting thing, though, is that in comparing it to the other Jack Wolf knives, it doesn't really seem that much thinner. Maybe slightly right in the center where there's kind of a swell to the handle material or the cover materials of the versions that do have a cover. But it's very minimal if it is actually thinner. But it does feel thinner to me, and I wonder if that's not because the jigging actually, kind of hollows out that handle. So I'm not sure. I don't think it's really thinner. I'm not going to put calipers to it, but it feels thinner to me, and it carries really well. I use the same Jack Wolf knife slip for all of the different models when I get them, and they really always work. And fits right in there. carries nicely. I generally carry, actually for years I carried my slip joints in my back right pocket, but recently, because I've been using a fanny pack and having my wallet in it, have carried them in the front left pocket. Either way works great in or really even out of the slip. So carries really nicely. Also a very classy looking knife in my opinion. I really like the look of the all metal. You know, it gives it a pretty traditional look in my opinion. If this didn't have the screws, you know, this would fit right in with knives from the early, you know, part of the 20th century. Companies were doing jigged metal, obviously not titanium, but jigged steel and things like that, you know, 100 plus years ago. So I think this is a really great knife. I think that the updates are nice updates on this knife versus the original version. And I think people are going to really enjoy this, particularly those who, you know, didn't get in on the Jack Wolf knives at the very beginning, the first model that they came out with, and would like a chance at that model, this model, the Sharpshooter. I think that this will be a great release for those people. So this is being released on Friday, January 19th, and you can get it at the Jack Wolf Knives dealers. I will put a link in the description. I always recommend knife ship free or traditional pocket knives. I know Jay and Austin personally, and I think that they do a great job, but there's lots of dealers. And I want to thank Ben again for sending this knife along. I love getting to check these out. I think they're really special, and it really is an enjoyable thing for me. And I hope you have enjoyed the video. If so, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Leave any comments you have below. And make sure you check out my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.